"Don't touch that office," the building supervisor said, not looking up from his clipboard, his voice carrying the particular boredom of a man delivering instructions he'd delivered 100 times before. "Mr. Voss's floor. You do the lobby, the east corridor, and the bathrooms on 3. That's it. You don't go to 7. You don't even look at the elevator that goes to 7. Rhea Caldwell nodded once, the way she'd learned to nod at men with clipboards, a small, efficient movement that confirmed receipt of information without inviting further conversation. She was good at that. Good at making herself into a piece of furniture, something a room contained without noticing. She'd spent 26 years becoming excellent at it. Her uniform was 2 sizes too large, a deliberate choice. Olive green fabric that swallowed the generous curve of her hips, the heaviness of her chest, the soft fullness of her belly. She wore her dark hair pinned flat, no jewelry, flat-soled shoes that made no sound on marble. The cleaning crew for Voss Financial dispersed into the building at 11:15 every weeknight. By 11:20, Rhea was alone in the east corridor on the 3rd floor, her cart's wheels squeaking in the particular rhythm she'd already memorized, and the building was so quiet she could hear the ventilation system breathe. She did not think about floor 7. She thought about the numbers she'd seen. It had been an accident, the first time. 3 weeks ago, a recycling bin outside the shredder room had been overfull, papers cascading onto the floor in a slow paper avalanche, and she'd gathered them automatically, the way she gathered everything that didn't belong on a floor she was responsible for. She hadn't meant to read them, but Rhea's eyes had always moved faster than her intentions, and the figure in the upper right column of the topmost page had snagged her gaze like a fishhook. $14 million. Transferred. And the destination code she recognized, because she'd spent 4 years before this job working junior reconciliation for a mid-size accounting firm, and that destination code was not a bank. She knew what it was. She'd put the papers in the bin. She'd finished the corridor. She'd gone home on the 11:58 bus and sat very still in the back seat all the way to her stop. She had not meant to start paying attention, but she had a memory that didn't ask permission, and the numbers were already inside it, arranged in neat, damning rows. The building supervisor's voice drifted up from the lobby below, something about the 2nd floor wax schedule, and Rhea pushed her cart around the corner and got back to work. She was, as always, invisible. She was, as always, watching. What she didn't know yet was that the elevator to floor 7 had a camera that faced the lobby, and that 3 weeks ago, on the night of the paper avalanche, a man who never slept before 2 in the morning had watched the footage and paused on a single frame. A woman in an oversized green uniform, crouching over scattered papers, head tilted at an angle he didn't recognize but somehow couldn't look away from. He had not yet learned her name. He had watched that 17 seconds of footage 4 times already. His name was Darius Voss, and he had not survived 34 years by ignoring things that made him stop and look twice. The night Rhea finally went to the 7th floor, she didn't mean to do that either. It began the way most irreversible things begin, with a small, ordinary problem. The service elevator, the one she was authorized to use, seized between floors 2 and 3 with a grinding complaint of old cables, and the emergency release put her out on the 4th floor landing with her cart half loaded and 40 minutes left in her shift. The stairwell to the 3rd floor was blocked by a fresh wax application that the day crew had somehow failed to mark as dry. The building supervisor had left at midnight. His deputy didn't answer his radio. Rhea stood in the 4th floor stairwell for approximately 30 seconds, running a genuinely practical calculation. The main elevator bank went to every floor. She needed to retrieve her remaining supplies from the 3rd floor storage closet. She could take the main elevator down, do it quickly, return before anyone noticed. Except the main elevator, when she called it, arrived already occupied. The doors opened and Darius Voss was standing inside it. She had seen photographs of him. Everyone who worked the building had seen photographs. In the same way you see the photograph of a country's flag. You know it exists. You understand it represents something vast and serious, but you don't expect it to suddenly appear 3 feet in front of you at 12:47 in the morning. He was taller than the photographs suggested. He wore black, all of it. The suit jacket a dark charcoal that became black at the shoulders. The shirt beneath it the color of deep water. His hair was dark and worn short, and his face was the kind of face that looked like it had been built for a specific purpose. All angles and economy, nothing wasted. His eyes, when they found her, were the color of obsidian, not dark brown but actually black, light-absorbing, the kind of eyes that took in everything and returned nothing. He looked at her. The elevator did not move. Rhea was aware, in the way she was always aware of her own body and spaces where she felt watched, of every inch of herself. The too large uniform, the flat shoes, the cleaning cart beside her with its collection of spray bottles and folded rags. She was aware of the width of her hips, the way the fabric still couldn't entirely conceal the heaviness of her thighs, the softness at her waist. She wanted, with a familiar and practiced urgency, to become smaller. "Get in," Darius Voss said. His voice was exactly as low as she would have imagined if she'd been foolish enough to imagine it, which she hadn't been. A baritone that didn't rise. A voice that had decided, somewhere in its owner's history, that volume was a waste of effort. Rhea got in. She positioned herself at the far left corner, cart in front of her like a small fortress. She pressed the button for 3. He was already holding the door open with one hand, the gesture so economical it seemed almost contemptuous of the effort, and then he released it, and the doors closed. "You're the East Corridor crew," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. Her own voice came out functional, which was the best she could hope for. "You've been here 3 weeks." She looked at the floor indicator. They were descending. 22 days, she said, because her brain offered the precise number before she could decide whether to offer it. A silence. Then, from her left peripheral vision, she was aware of him turning his head slightly to look at her, and she kept her eyes fixed on the floor indicator with the focused attention of someone diffusing something. 22, he said. It's a Tuesday. I started on a Thursday. She didn't know why she was still talking. The number 3 lit up. The doors opened. She moved her cart forward and stepped out with the efficient momentum of someone who has places to be. Behind her, she heard him say, "What's your name?" She stopped. The corridor stretched ahead of her, pale and fluorescent and safe. She turned. He was standing in the elevator doorway, one hand holding the door open again, and he was watching her with the stillness of something that has decided to be patient for as long as necessary. "Rhea," she said. "Caldwell." He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "Good night, Rhea Caldwell." The elevator closed. She stood in the corridor for a moment longer than she should have, her hand on her cart, and then she went to get her supplies because she had 20 minutes left and a corridor to finish, and she was, above all things, professional. She told herself it didn't mean anything. She told herself that a man like Darius Voss spoke to everyone in the building, that it was a management practice, knowing the staff by name, or at least by function, that the way he'd said 22, as though the number itself had done something interesting, was simply the behavior of a man who processed information carefully. She had a very good brain, and she used it, on the bus home at 1:15 in the morning, to build a perfectly reasonable architecture of explanations. The numbers from the shredder room were still arranged in their neat rows behind all of it. She had not told anyone about the numbers. She was not sure, sitting in the back of the night bus with her canvas bag on her lap, whether she was more afraid of what the numbers meant or of the fact that the man at the center of them had just learned her name. Both fears were significant. She filed them beside each other and watched the dark city move past the window, and the bus carried her away from the building where Darius Voss was probably still awake, and she thought about $14 million moving to a code that wasn't a bank, and she thought about the way he'd held the elevator door like the door had no choice but to wait for him, and she got off at her stop and walked the 4 blocks home in the particular silence of a city at 2 in the morning, and she did not sleep well. The 3rd week of April was when things became impossible to manage quietly. Rhea had, in the weeks since the elevator, been careful. She'd kept to her corridors, her cart, her rhythm. She'd taken the service elevator exclusively, even the 2 additional times it had ground and protested, because the service elevator did not contain Darius Voss. She'd refined her mental ledger of the numbers she'd seen, adding to it twice more when the shredder room recycling had overflowed again. The building generated an extraordinary amount of paper waste for a financial services firm, which was itself interesting, and she'd built a picture that had no comfortable frame. Someone inside Voss Financial was running a skimming operation, not crude skimming, not small amounts that might read as clerical error, sophisticated, architecturally elegant theft that used the company's own legitimate transfer infrastructure as camouflage. The destination codes shifted every cycle, which was clever, but the underlying pattern didn't shift because patterns never did, if you looked long enough and had the particular kind of brain that Rhea had. She'd traced it across 19 weeks of fragmentary data from recycling bin overflow and could now say, with the confidence of someone who had spent 4 years in reconciliation, that approximately $4.3 million had moved in the last quarter alone. She had not told anyone. She was a night cleaner. She cleaned floors. The evening it became impossible began not with her but with a woman named Cassandra Pelletier, who was the office manager for the 6th floor and who had stayed late for the 3rd time that week, and who had decided, at 10 minutes past midnight, that she needed a coffee from the 3rd floor kitchen and that the night cleaning staff were, functionally, furniture. Rhea was wiping down the kitchen counters when Cassandra came in. Cassandra was thin in the particular way of someone who considered thinness an achievement, and she wore her hair in a sleek, dark ponytail, and she looked at Rhea the way she might look at a cart left in an inconvenient place. "You're blocking the machine," Cassandra said. Rhea moved. She was practiced at moving. She repositioned herself against the far counter with her cloth and her spray bottle and became, as much as possible, part of the wall. Cassandra made her coffee, and then, while it brewed, she turned and looked at Rhea in a way that had nothing to do with coffee. "They really do hire anyone for these positions, don't they?" Cassandra said. It was not a question any more than Darius Voss's statements were questions, but the intent was opposite in every way. "I suppose the uniform helps. Obscures the worst of it." Rhea looked at the counter she'd been wiping. "I've seen you trying to squeeze past the supply carts in the East Corridor," Cassandra continued, lifting her coffee cup, her voice carrying the particular meditative quality of someone thinking aloud, as though Rhea's reaction was not worth monitoring. "You really should consider whether a job with this much moving around is suitable for someone of your—" She paused, the pause doing more work than any word she might have chosen. "Build." The kitchen was very quiet. Rhea's cloth moved in a slow circle on the counter. Her face did not change. She had, over the years, developed a very specific internal architecture for moments like this, a kind of load-bearing silence, structural, designed to hold weight without collapsing. She breathed in. She breathed out. "I manage fine," she said, because she refused to say nothing, and she refused to say more than that. Cassandra made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. She picked up her coffee and left. Rhea stood in the kitchen for a moment after the door swung shut. The fluorescent light buzzed above her. Her cloth was still in her hand. She was aware of her own body the way she always was after moments like that, not the way Darius Voss's gaze had made her aware that strange arrested quality, but the old way, the crushing way, the way that made her want to fold herself into the smallest possible configuration and take up less space in the world. She put the cloth in her cart. She finished the kitchen. She moved on. She did not know that the sixth-floor office manager's access badge had logged her into the third-floor corridor at 12:11. She did not know that the security system on floor 7 logged the access of every badge in the building in real time. She did not know that Darius Voss, sitting at his desk at 12:13 with 2 open files and a glass of water, had looked at his secondary monitor and seen the badge log, and then looked at the kitchen camera feed and watched a woman in an oversized green uniform stand very still while another woman said something that made the air in the kitchen seem to change. He could not hear it. He watched Ria's face, which told him nothing and everything. He watched the quality of her stillness. He watched Cassandra Pelletier leave. He watched Ria Caldwell press a cloth against a counter and not move for 11 seconds. He picked up his phone. He set it down. He looked at the footage for another moment. Then he picked up the phone again and called his second-in-command. "In the morning," he said, when the call connected. "Find out everything about the East Corridor night cleaning staff, particularly one Ria Caldwell." A pause. "Also find out where Cassandra Pelletier worked before this building." He paused again. "And pull her complete financial records." He hung up and looked at the kitchen feed for another moment. Ria had resumed wiping down the counter. Her movements were efficient. Her back was very straight. He looked at the set of her shoulders for a long time. The next evening, the service elevator was working perfectly. Ria arrived at 11:15, collected her cart from the third-floor supply closet, and was in the East Corridor by 11:30. And nothing unusual happened for the first 2 hours of her shift, which was the last time anything would be ordinary for a very long while. At 1:20 in the morning, she was finishing the supply closet at the end of the corridor when she heard voices, not the building's usual ambient sounds, not havoc, not the distant complaints of settling architecture. Voices, male, multiple, coming from the stairwell adjacent to the supply closet. And there was an urgency in the sound that her body registered before her brain caught up. She turned off her closet light by instinct. The stairwell door opened. 2 men in suits came through it, and behind them, a third man being held by the arm in a way that was not assistance. The man being held was sweating through his collar. His hands were in front of him. The man holding his arm was large, broad, wearing dark gray, and he had the particular quality of stillness that Ria was learning to associate with Darius Voss's orbit. That predatory economy of movement, nothing wasted. They hadn't seen her. The supply closet door was 3/4 closed. She was in the dark. The 4th man through the stairwell door was Darius Voss. He was carrying nothing. He wore no jacket. His sleeves were rolled to the forearm in precise folds, and his hands were bare, which struck her as somehow significant in a way she couldn't immediately parse. He looked at the sweating man for a moment. 41 transfers, Darius said. His voice in the corridor was the same as it had been in the elevator, low, unhurried. 19 weeks. The sweating man made a sound. You used the transit codes from the Meridian account, Darius continued, as though they were discussing weather. The codes rotate, so you thought the rotation would obscure the destination. It would have, if the destinations had varied. The sweating man's mouth opened. They didn't vary, Darius said. You routed to the same 3 shells every time, shifted the codes, kept the architecture identical. He tilted his head by approximately 3 degrees. Who taught you to count, Marlowe? Someone who didn't finish the lesson. Ria, in the dark of the supply closet, felt her breath stop, because she had been thinking, for 5 weeks, about the 3 shells, about the destination architecture that didn't change. She had seen it. She had mapped it on the back of bus receipts. She had the account codes memorized because her memory memorized things without asking permission, and she had the transit patterns in her head like a piece of music she hadn't meant to learn. She had not told anyone. She was a night cleaner. The man called Marlowe said something she didn't catch, something broken and explanatory, and Darius Voss looked at him with the patience of someone who has already arrived at the end of the calculation and is simply waiting for the other person to catch up. "You're going to give me the recovery routing," Darius said. "Tonight, you have a window of approximately 40 minutes before the account structure updates and the shells become inactive." He paused. "This is the only time I'll say please without it being rhetorical." Marlowe was shaking now. "I can't. The recovery. I said it so only I could initiate it. It needs a secondary authentication that only I have access to. You can't force." "I'm not going to force anything," Darius said pleasantly. "You're going to do it voluntarily because you understand what the alternative is." The alternative, from Marlowe's expression, was abundantly clear. And then Marlowe said something that made Ria's hand tighten on the edge of the closet door. "It won't work," Marlowe said, and there was something in his voice now that was almost vicious, some last desperate leverage. "The recovery authentication. I structured it so it needs a dual key input, a second account holder, someone with concurrent access to both the source and destination architecture simultaneously. There is no such person in your organization, because I specifically designed it that way. The money is gone. The window will close in 38 minutes, and there is nothing you can do that gets it back." Silence. Darius Voss looked at Marlowe. The silence had a texture to it, a weight, and Ria Caldwell, in the dark of the supply closet, was doing something she had not given herself permission to do. She was thinking. Specifically, she was thinking about the Meridian account structure, which she had reconstructed from recycled paper over 19 weeks, and about dual key authentication and transfer systems of this architecture, and about the fact that a dual key structure of this particular design didn't actually require two holders from the same organization. It required two holders with simultaneous authenticated access to specific account layers, the source layer and the destination layer. And she had spent 4 years in reconciliation, and she knew, because the documents had told her, the destination layer codes. She had the destination architecture memorized. She was still in the dark. She did not move. She was a night cleaner. Her hand was on the door. She thought about Cassandra Pelletier's voice, about the word build and the pause before it, about how she had spent 26 years taking up less space, folding herself, becoming part of walls. She thought about $4.3 million and a 40, now 36-minute window. She pushed the door open. The light from the corridor fell across her. The large man in dark gray moved immediately, a single step toward her, and then Darius Voss said, "Wait," and the large man stopped. Darius looked at her. Ria Caldwell stood in the corridor doorway in her oversized olive uniform with her cleaning cloth still in one hand, and she was aware of every dimension of herself, every inch, the fullness of her and the visibility of her, and the fact that there were 4 men in this corridor, 2 of whom had every reason to regard her as a threat, and she breathed in through her nose and said, in a voice that came out steadier than she deserved, "I can do the secondary authentication." Nobody spoke. "The dual key structure," she said. "I've been reading the transfer architecture for 5 weeks. The destination layer codes. I have them. Memorized." She looked at Darius. "If you give me access to a terminal with Meridian source authorization, I can run the dual key input simultaneously. It doesn't need 2 people from the same organization. The system just needs concurrent authenticated access to both layers." Marlowe made a sound that was almost a laugh. "That's a cleaning lady." "Shut up," Darius said. He was looking at Ria. Not at the oversized uniform, at her face, at her eyes. with a focused intensity that felt like the opposite of invisibility. "How did you read the transfer architecture?" "Recycling overflow from the shredder room," she said. "I put the papers back, but I couldn't unread them." "I have." She paused. "A memory." "What kind of memory?" "The kind that doesn't ask permission." She met his eyes. "We have 34 minutes. He looked at her for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was a long time when the money was moving. "Marcus," he said, and the large man in gray was already moving, already gesturing toward the stairwell, already in motion, and Darius looked at Rhea one more moment before he said, "Come with me," and the words landed differently than any words she'd been given in a very long time, because they were not a dismissal, and they were not a management courtesy, and they were not furniture arranging. They were an address, specifically to her. She went. The terminal on the 7th floor was nothing like what she'd imagined, and she had specifically not let herself imagine it. The office was dark charcoal and warm amber, a kind of deliberate atmosphere, low lighting that had nothing in common with the fluorescent corridors below, and the desk was large and clear, and the terminal on it was open and logged in, and Darius stood beside her, and she sat in his chair without being told to, because there was no time for negotiation about chairs, and her hands found the keyboard. "Source authorization," she said. Darius leaned in and entered a sequence she couldn't see because he blocked the screen with his body, a deliberate angular shield, and then he stepped back and said, "Go." Rhea went. Her fingers on the keyboard were not trembling. She didn't let them tremble. She had the destination codes in her head in the order she'd arranged them, and the system's architecture was exactly what she'd reconstructed from 5 weeks of recycled paper. She felt a strange, fierce satisfaction about that, about being right, about the fact that her long, careful attention to discarded things had built something true. She worked through the dual key input in sequence, cross-referencing the layer access, and Darius was standing 2 feet to her right, and she could feel the quality of his attention, the way you feel heat from a source, directional and specific. 22 minutes to window close. She found the recovery routing. Her hands moved. She was dimly aware of Marlowe being held in the corner of the room by Marcus, and of a second man she hadn't noticed before, and of the ambient sounds of the office, and of none of it, because the numbers were here and they were arranged in front of her, and this was the thing she was built for, the precise, undeniable competence of it, the way the architecture responded to the right inputs, the way all systems did when you understood them. "Initiating dual-key concurrent authentication," she said, not because anyone had asked for a narration, but because speaking helped her move through the sequence without error. Source layer locked, destination layer, cross-referencing the first shell. Her fingers, cross-referencing the second shell. Her fingers. The third is the largest. If I move it last, the system might flag the sequential access pattern. She paused, looked at the screen. I need to mask the third shell initiation inside the first recovery batch. That means I'll run them simultaneously, which requires me to execute 2 inputs in a window of less than a second. She said this to the room generally, and to Darius specifically. "Can you do that?" he said. Again, not a question. "I've never had to," she said honestly, "but I understand the timing architecture." She looked at the screen. 11 minutes. "Do it," he said. She did it. The recovery batch initiated. The shell accounts began draining back into the Meridian source. The system's authentication logged them both, source and destination, concurrent, exactly as she'd described, and the third shell's transfer buried itself in the first batch's data packet, the way she'd said it would, and the numbers moved, and the numbers were, when she checked the final confirmation, correct. She sat back. Her hands were in her lap. $4.3 million recovered, or close enough that the rounding error was something a forensic accountant could clean up in a morning. The room was very quiet. Darius took one step toward the desk and looked at the confirmation screen. He stood there for a moment, then he said, 39 seconds to spare. Rhea looked at her hands. I know, she said. I was watching the clock. He said nothing for a moment. She was aware suddenly of all of it, the 7th floor, the amber light, the fact that she was sitting in Darius Voss's chair in a cleaning uniform with a cloth still folded in her pocket, and that she had just recovered his money and she was still invisible and would remain invisible, and that was fine. That was what she did. She did the thing and stepped back behind the furniture line. She moved to stand. Stay, he said. She stayed. He walked around the desk and crouched in front of her, which was so unexpected that her entire self went still. He was at her eye level. The obsidian eyes were close, and they were doing what she'd noticed in the elevator, taking in everything, returning nothing, except that something had shifted in them. Something had altered in the quality of the attention, and she couldn't name it, but her body recognized it with a warmth she was not prepared for. You've been reading our transfer records for 5 weeks, he said. I didn't intend to, she said. I was cleaning. And you didn't report it. She looked at him. To whom? She said. I'm a night cleaner. I clean the East Corridor. I don't have there isn't a channel for, she stopped. Honesty seemed safer than construction. I didn't know who was safe to tell. The operation was sophisticated. Someone inside built it. I didn't know how far it went. He nodded slowly. And tonight, he said. You could have stayed in the closet. She looked at him. He was still crouched in front of her. His elbows were on his knees, which made him look, for just a moment, like someone who was not a man who commanded rooms, like someone who was choosing to be eye level with her, specifically, deliberately. You would have lost the money, she said. You didn't know that mattered to you. I knew what was right, she said, and it came out quiet, but it didn't come out small, and she surprised herself with that. He studied her face. Rhea Caldwell, he said. 4 years in reconciliation at Harmon Fitch, left after a contract dispute. Night cleaning for the last 7 months. You have a master's degree in financial forensics that you have never used professionally. Her breath stopped. I had you investigated 3 days ago, he said simply. After the kitchen, she felt cold, and then something else, something more complicated. The kitchen, she said. I saw the camera feed. His voice didn't change, but something in it did. A compression, a tightening, like a cable taking weight. I saw what she said to you. The fluorescent memory of the kitchen rose in her. Cassandra Pelletier's voice, the pause before build, the small sound that wasn't a laugh. Rhea looked at the edge of the desk. It was nothing, she said. Don't do that, he said. She looked at him. You just recovered $4.3 million in 11 minutes from a dual-key lock that my entire financial team couldn't break in 72 hours, he said. You don't get to say nothing was nothing, not to me. She felt something shift in the architecture of the room, or in herself, possibly both. She wasn't wrong, Rhea said, and her voice was quieter now, carrying the specific weight of something she'd been holding for a very long time. About the build comment, she wasn't saying anything I haven't. She paused, thought, about myself. He looked at her. Then you've been thinking incorrectly, he said. It came out exactly as he said everything else, in the same low declarative baritone, with no increase in volume and no decoration, the way he might state a business fact. She stared at him. You are the most compelling person who has walked through this building in 3 years, he said. You made yourself invisible and you watched everything and you built a forensic picture of an internal theft operation in 5 weeks with recycled paper and a memory you describe as not asking permission. And tonight you walked out of a closet into a room with 4 unknown men because 34 minutes was not enough time for fear. He looked at her steadily. That is not a body to apologize for. That is not a woman to diminish. What she said to you in that kitchen was the speech of someone who could not do what you do and knew it. The room was very quiet. Ria's throat was tight. You don't know me, she said, because she needed to say something that wasn't breaking down in his chair, on his floor, in his building where she was supposed to be furniture. I'm going to, he said. It was not a question. It was not a wish. It had the quality of a calendar entry. You're not cleaning this building anymore. She looked at him sharply. I'm offering you a position, he said. Financial forensics, internal compliance, full authority over the accounting architecture. Salary that reflects the degree you're not using, an office on this floor. His voice dropped by the precise amount that indicated the shift from business to something else, something that ran parallel and beneath and was not the same thing. And I'm telling you so that you have the information. I have watched 17 seconds of camera footage 14 times in 3 weeks, and tonight I crouched in front of a woman in an olive cleaning uniform, and I was not thinking about the money. She breathed. The Cassandra Pelletier Access Badge, Ria said, because her brain was still her brain and it was still running the numbers, is the thing you should pull first. She's been in the building late 3 times this week, and her floor's financial reporting lag is 48 hours outside normal parameters. I noticed it in the recycling. He looked at her for a beat. Then he said, I know, and there was something in his voice that sounded just for a moment like a man who had found exactly what he was looking for. I pulled her records 2 days ago. She's connected to Marlowe. He paused. So is the building supervisor. Ria thought of the clipboard, the dismissive voice. Don't touch that office. He told me not to go to floor 7, she said. I know, Darius said. He looked at her. You came anyway. She had. She'd come anyway, and the money was recovered, and she was sitting in his chair on the floor she'd been told not to look at, and she was not invisible and she was not furniture, and the room's amber light was warm on her face, and on the soft, generous fullness of her that no uniform had ever been large enough to entirely hide, and Darius Voss was still at her eye level and showing no inclination to move. I didn't have anywhere else to be, she said. He almost smiled. It was a very small movement, a slight shift at the corner of his mouth. You have a terrible habit of underselling yourself, he said. I'm working on it, she said. And the correction of him, the exact evenness of it, made him look at her with something open in his face that she hadn't seen there before, and she recognized it even though she hadn't expected to, because she'd been watching him carefully since the elevator, and she could read him the way she read numbers. And what she saw in him now was not a man who collected things or commanded things or simply acquired things, but a man who had been looking at 17 seconds of camera footage 14 times because she had tilted her head at an angle he didn't recognize, and something in him had decided, without asking, to learn the reason. She was not invisible. She had not been invisible to him for 3 weeks. She was beginning, very slowly, and with the particular precision of someone who has been wrong about something important for a very long time, to consider the possibility that invisible had never been the right word for her. The 39 seconds, she said. He looked at her. I was going to say 40, she said, but I wanted to be precise. This time the shift at the corner of his mouth was larger. Stay, he said again, and it meant more things than it had the first time. She stayed. Marcus appeared in the doorway, reported on Marlowe in 3 sentences, and retreated without having acknowledged Ria's presence, which told her something about the kind of household Darius ran, that his orders were the atmosphere, and everyone breathed them without remarking on it. The rest of that night became a different kind of ordinary. Documents, coffee that materialized from somewhere without her asking, a second chair that appeared beside the desk, Darius explaining the scope of what Marlowe had built, and Ria, from memory and from the documentation she'd been quietly handed, filling in the sections of it that no one on the 7th floor had yet been able to reconstruct. She was precise. She was thorough. She worked with the focused velocity of someone who has been waiting for a long time to be asked to bring everything she had to a room, and the room was finally big enough. At 4 in the morning, she looked up from the screen and became aware that Darius was looking at her, rather than the documents in front of him. "What?" she said. "You've been doing that for 40 minutes, he said. "What you're doing with the 3rd column. Cross-referencing the shell withdrawal timing with the company's own transfer schedule," she said. Marlowe timed his skimming to coincide with legitimate high-volume transfer days. It creates noise, but the noise pattern itself is a signature, because he needed the same noise conditions every time. She pointed at the screen. "There. He's been doing it for longer than 19 weeks. This goes back at least 2 years. Silence. 2 years, he said. "I'd estimate 8 to 11 million total," she said, "pending access to the full transfer records." She looked at him. "You'll want a full forensic accounting, someone who can testify, if it comes to that." "I know someone," he said, and the look on his face was very specific. She understood she was the someone. She looked back at the screen. "I've never testified," she said. "You will," he said, not threatening, certain. "The same certainty as everything else," he said, the certainty of a man who had reorganized the world into a particular shape and expected it to hold. At 4:47 in the morning, she became aware that she was tired in the way of someone who has spent everything they had on something worthy, a clean, respectable exhaustion. She sat back in the chair. "I should go," she said. "My bus." "I'll have a car take you," he said. She started to say that wasn't necessary. He looked at her. She stopped. "All right," she said. He stood and came around the desk and held out a business card, which seemed, given everything, like a remarkably ordinary gesture, and when she reached up to take it, their fingers came close, without quite touching, and the warmth of the near contact was something she felt in her palm and up her arm, and she filed it with precision. "Tomorrow," he said, 10 in the morning, for the formal offer. "I work nights," she said. "You work nights," he said, past tense, certain, final. "Tomorrow, 10. She looked at the card. His name and a number and nothing else. "I know your name," she said. "I know," he said. "I want you to have it in writing." She was not invisible. She had not been invisible for 3 weeks. She was beginning to understand, perhaps the most visible person in this room, to the one set of eyes that had ever looked at 17 seconds of footage 14 times and thought, "I need to know the reason." She got up. She was aware, as she always was, of the fullness of her in the low amber light, the soft weight of her, the curves that no uniform had ever managed to fully contain, and she waited for the familiar urge to minimize, to fold, to take up less of the warm air in this room. It came, the way it always did, because 26 years of practice doesn't dissolve in a single night, but it was quieter than it had ever been. And underneath it, something else was growing. Something with the structure of a fact, load-bearing, true. Darius Voss had watched 17 seconds of footage 14 times, and what he'd seen was her, and he had not looked away. She picked up her canvas bag. She had the cloth still in her pocket. She took it out and set it on the desk, because she would not be needing it. 10 o'clock, she said. 10, he confirmed. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. The doors opened on an empty car, amber light spilling out, and she stepped in and pressed the lobby button and looked back through the closing gap, and Darius Voss was standing at the edge of his office, watching her go, his hands at his sides, his face open in the way she'd only seen once before tonight. And she thought about the bus receipt calculations folded in her bag and about a memory that didn't ask permission, and about the weight of her own body in warm light, and about being seen, really seen. And the doors closed, and Rhea Caldwell rode down from the 7th floor, in a building she was not supposed to have entered, having recovered everything that had been taken, including, quietly and without fanfare, something she hadn't known she'd lost. The car was waiting at the front entrance, a dark sedan, a driver who did not speak. She got in. The city moved past the windows in the 4 in the morning dark. She did not sit in the back corner. She sat in the center of the seat, her bag in her lap, her back straight, taking up the space she was in, and when the car stopped at her building and she stepped out into the cool pre-dawn air, she stood on the pavement for a moment before going in. She thought, 10 o'clock. She thought, I'll wear something that fits. If this story made you stop scrolling, hit the like button. That tells the algorithm that women who don't fold deserve to be seen. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories where the woman in the corner turns out to be the one who changes everything. Drop a comment below and tell us, did you think she was going to walk out of that closet? Because we need to know. Share this with someone who keeps herself too small. Sometimes the right story at the right moment is everything.